Brian O'Driscoll
on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
All right, the November internationals are in the books. The URC is back this weekend, but it's time for us to luxuriate in some of the best quality performances that we've seen back to back. It's like over 100 points scored, 3 wins. The defence looking good. Brian, what could possibly go wrong? It's, we're a winning rugby culture all of a sudden.
Thankfully, we've never been here before.
And we're definitely not going to get carried away.
No. Do you know what? We, like I said after the New Zealand game, we'll enjoy the moment, but I think be very aware of, of past transgressions in a very similar position. It does feel they're in a better spot. I'll tell you why, is because all of their game and what I perceive to be the difficulty around defending it. It's not a game plan, obviously, that teams can go and analyse and go, okay, let's shut this down, or this is how we counter it, because they're playing heads up, because they've got multiple options. And I think that's the exciting thing from my perspective, is being able to watch and see how the game will evolve from decision making rather than a shape being different. Someone has to be open. No defence can lock down every possible outlet. So if you can pick the right ones, which they did an awful lot over the course of November, you get the success that they had. So that, coupled with fantastic defence, which was the backbone of their performances. Andy Farrell said it. So there's lots to be very, very positive about and excited about. And that next up, the Six Nations will be interesting viewing, because England feel they're in a great spot as well. France do likewise. Wales had a good win against Australia. So Scotland are emerging again. So it feels like Northern Hemisphere rugby is back on a high again, and it makes for very competitive viewing in February and March.
It does. And the other thing about this is it seems like there's not one single unifying reason for the success. That you can look at Andy Farrell is coming into a level of maturity. He's added a backroom team that has very clearly defined roles. O'Connell's getting a lot of credit. Mike Catt's game plan seems to be coming to fruition. Their law changes seems to be having a positive impact in terms of what Ireland are capable of doing, and our players are all of a sudden fit, which, touch wood, most of our players were available.
And strong. I think that's a big, became collision winners this November. And game plans...
Is that down to the personnel in some ways?
Yeah, I think it's a number of different factors. It's obviously high fitness levels, a lot of work done in the gym and strength training.
Porter and Furlong on the field at the same time.
Those two, Furlong looks like a man mountain. He really does. I think there's a huge security that comes with his presence on the field as well, because he's ready for the hardship part, the scrummaging, doing his job at line-out time, but his ball carrying, but the subtlety of his skills as well. When you have a tight head prop that's able to do that, it lets other people focus on their roles. You're not worried about players finding themselves in particular positions, not having to overthink the lineup, particularly when they're trying to get into their phase play. So when they try and get that pod of 3 off the 9, you're not worried about who the ball player is at 2. It feels quite seamless. And I think you've really seen a development of individuals being able to come in and play a game plan, a bit akin to what we've seen in Leinster over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. It hasn't really mattered who the individuals are, that there's a seamless transition in, irrespective of their experience or how they've done previously or why they're in there, and that makes for a very, very competitive environment, which maybe we haven't had over the course of the last couple of years. We've really lent on a number of individuals, but there has been this emergence of new players coming through that we should get excited about.
That point is really interesting just to tease out, because in the past it felt like whoever the ball carrier was supposed to be in that pod was preordained, and so if the wrong player was in the wrong position, you would see a lot of you go, and all of a sudden the ball is slowed down and the opposition defensive line is up and somebody gets lined up and they get smashed and we're behind the gain line. Whereas now it's just flow.
Yeah.
It's more flow state.
It does feel as though they're able to get into that shape very easily. Like before, we were waiting for the setup to happen. It feels that it's organically happening much quicker, and so you don't have Gibson Park or Casey or Murray waiting for that setup to move the ball away from the base of a ruck, because we all know that it's the longer it takes you to set up, the more time the defence has to get into their positioning and swap the right personnel in closer to rucks and so on. So
why is that happening?
I think you've got just comfort in everyone being able to play every role, and sometimes you'll see the tight forwards out wide. You'll see the front rowers out wide, but you see Kelleher comfort in the tram.
Wow.
Likewise, Furlong out in the 15-metre area where he's equally adept as he is in the loose, and there's a huge comfort that comes with that it is that numbers on your back become irrelevant after the first phase. The thing that's been most impressive for me is, besides the seamlessness of getting into that shape, is the selection of what they do and the variety of what they do in that first pod. And it goes to second receiver most of the time, the second person lined up. They can carry or they can stick it out the back. They can hit the runner outside them on the short runner who's trying to check the inside defence, or they can pop it inside, which they've done. And it's the variety of all four plays keeps the defence guessing. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to disjoint a defence out wide most of the time. Sometimes when they feel the need to carry forward and then set up another pod or then go to 10, but the plays out the back, you're trying to get the defence out wide vulnerable. They're pressing hard, and we saw it in the New Zealand game where their Perinara tried to play high a couple of times and got caught out, because they've got the right depth out wide to be able to pick the right pass, to run the right lines. And a couple of times at the weekend, Robbie Henshaw probably played a bit too aggressively, having not been in that system that regularly. So for him, to be able to learn his speed and timing on striking onto it or just being the playmaker, that'll come with more time in camp as well. But I think it's how they've kept the defence guessing so much inside, so they're sticking the first 4 or 5 defenders from the ruck, and it creates this dogleg outside, which is a nervousness from a defensive perspective, where you want to have the security of that one line, but all of a sudden if you're shooting out, you got to make the read right, and if you get it wrong, you can really be put to the sword.
What makes this a little bit different as well, it feels, is that we haven't thrown out the possibility of using the strike plays or the accuracy at the breakdown. That was the hallmark of the Schmidt era. By keeping Andy Farrell from that coaching ticket, we're actually able to lean back on all of that, and that's still all there as part of the IP. And
I think a huge amount of that, though, certainly the ruck is very Paulie centred. He was a real student of Joe's detail around the ruck, and the detail of the ruck starts with being a collision winner. If you can get ascendancy, particularly when you have the ball in attack, I'm talking mostly, but it's relevant in defence too. But if in attack, if you can win that advantage line, even by inches, winning inches versus losing inches has a positive knock-on effect to what you do next. But the accuracy of the clear out, of not sending too many bodies to rucks, and I think that's one other thing, the ability to look after rucks with 1 or 2 individuals clearing out allows others to realign for the next phase, and they're not second guessing whether a job is being done. They see the bodies, they're able to read it and identify, we've got 2 to that, I can play in the next pod on the next phase. Sometimes you'll see a security runner, Josh van der Fleer does it very well, where he'll just play that extra body, that loose forward, to just make sure that ball is won if they feel a little bit light. But for the most part, the imagery that is showing in front of them to be able to identify what the outlook looks in being able to clear and be efficient at ruck time has become very evident across the board, and so it allows them to get their shape out wider on the next phase.
And so in training, what's O'Connell doing to make that, how does that happen?
Well, I think that's a technical aspect about just being very good at ruck time. So that's the clear out side of things, winning the shoulder predominantly. In a game now where we're seeing referees awarding the jackler very early, they have to show a clear picture of trying to get the ball. It's just making sure you get under that. Or if they do win the shoulder initially, how do you get them out forcefully to make the referee make it a difficult decision for them, where they might be on the ball, the jackler might be on the ball for a second, but if you're able to twist and and manipulate that contact point and get them off the ball. Referees want someone to be on the ball 2-3 seconds. If you can deny them the 3 seconds, you stand a chance of not turning that ball over. And I just think more often than not, they've won the shoulder. They've gotten in and they've identified the threat before it's arrived. And in doing that, it means they're able to get a lower body position. It's that airplane taking off rather than the one landing, is making sure that it's a positive picture to the referee, that you're not trying to seal off, that you're trying to play positively, but also just getting there and preempting where you need to be before the opposition do.
There was a real chance that after the high of the All Blacks game and the atmosphere and playing for the first time for some of them in front of a full house, that there would be a bit of a letdown against Argentina. And that first half against Argentina was scrappy enough. If Argentina had kicked their penalties, which they should have because they weren't difficult, and if your man hadn't dropped the ball on the line, then Argentina would have actually been ahead of us at that stage. So it wasn't that we killed Argentina in the first half, but it was the fact that they kept playing the new style and they didn't dissipate from what they were trying to do, that there was a confidence there even though there was late changes to the team. It was all interchangeable. It felt like it's a very well drilled team, and that's the hallmark of good coaching.
Yeah, it's all really come together. It really has, you know. And we talked earlier this month about the uncertainty over the last 2 years about what this shape was, what it was looking like. How was it not? It hadn't been manifesting itself in any overall performances. There were patches, but then it does feel as though
the England game felt like a complete island.
Clicked. It does. It does. And sometimes a victory against a superpower like England are, even though they've had a poor Six Nations, it didn't matter. It felt like it was a real catalyst for that shape to evolve over the course of the summer with the Lions away. But then when they got into camp again, felt like they picked up where they left off in Six Nations. So. And then you get a really great performance against Japan. You play the best team in the world in New Zealand and beat them. And then, the easy thing to do would have been to have scrapped to a victory or beaten Argentina by 20 points because of their physicality, because they're scrappers. But to put 50 on them, I think was a resounding message that they feel as though they've really clicked as a team, and that when they're at their best, they can build a score. Anytime, when have we beaten Argentina by 50 points? I don't care at the end of their season, whatnot. 50 is a big number against a tier 1 nation like them.
Yeah, and the performance against New Zealand was good enough to have like a little bit more accuracy in it. We left a lot of points on the field.
Well, that's another 2 scores. They should have been touching 40 in the New Zealand game, got 29.
It was like we learned from the New Zealand game as well. There was like a far more dynamism when we were close in. There was a period at the end of the first half in particular of that New Zealand game that I'd say they'll look back on and go, okay, this is what we did wrong and here's what we did in the next game to fix that. We just need to keep doing that.
Yeah, but also with that, the efficiency and the decision making of going to the corner. I think Ireland were one of the first teams, an instigator of going to the corner a lot more and turning down those 3 points. And it feels like there's a big progression in the game that now that you're going to need tries, and that even in Test match rugby, kicking threes sometimes isn't enough.
I did wonder about that.
Squeeze pressure, and it feels very alien to my time.
Well, what if we're in a World Cup quarter final? What are we going to do? What do you think? Are we
I
doing
think
that?
they're going to go that route now. I think they are, because they backed themselves. And the reason, my point was that the efficiency they show and the threat, even when they haven't delivered, it looks as though for all money that they're going to score a try, and for the odd knock on or being held up or a great piece of defensive play on a few occasions over the course of November where they were denied, or a double movement.
Yeah.
So, but you look at how easy, particularly against Argentina, how easy they managed to maul them over a couple of times, and playing in close quarters, and that comes from Porter and Keller and Furlong setting the tone, but then having Doris's aggressive carrying, Josh van der Fleer, the most improved player in that Irish rugby setup, and maybe Irish rugby. I think he's been phenomenal. He's been the quietly gone about his business, but I think a hugely impactful November series for him that has stamped him as Ireland's number 17.
Yeah, which was like one of our most competitive spots. Will Connors is just back training this week, and people will forget, but he was there or thereabouts in terms of possession of that shirt just before he got injured. So,
and what about Dan Levy? We're not even mentioned Dan Levy. He was the Great White Hope a couple of years ago before his injury, that Grand Slam year. So, you know, Josh van der Fleer has obviously gone away and listened to the messaging from his coaching ticket, and the aggressiveness of his ball carrying is the real standout point. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he hits it like he means it.
That's about knowing. That's about not thinking. Is it like?
I think understanding. That's an intuition about running good lines, running square, trying to catch the defence before they realise they're in trouble. And you just have to be a fraction of a second ahead in your thought process. And I think he manages to do that. I think he's a very, very clever player. Probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves from that point of view. But every team needs one of them, just a security blanket of being. I mentioned about, you know, the security in the rucks, making a nuisance of himself as a tackler, as a jackler in the second efforts, clearing rucks. Just it's the dirty work. And we've seen so much of Conan and Doris, but you can't have 3 ball carrying performers. Josh has stepped up when he's needed to in that regard, but he's doing so much dirty work as well, and very, very low error count as well. I saw one bad pass at the weekend to Doris, inside shoulder, that he'll be kicking himself for. But I'm thrilled for him, because I think there was question marks around him whether he could step up truly consistently at that international level. But I think this November really feels as though he's put that to bed, and hopefully he'll have that confidence to now that he is the guy in possession of the jersey, that he'll continue with those performances.
He's come back from a very serious hip injury as well, so that would have slowed him down. And fingers crossed he manages to manage that for the rest of the time, and the rest of the time is between now and the World Cup. Next year we have 3 tests in New Zealand. We go to London to play England, and we go to Paris to play France. So we should enjoy this now, because next year is going to be a very serious year in terms of our credentials versus those, and we learn a lot more about them. So I like the whole thing about getting carried away and peaking too soon. What are you going to do?
Yeah, what are you going to do? And people, we've been here before, and you guys will never learn. But you got to enjoy the highs as well. You know,
otherwise, there's no point.
No, there's no point. So I think this time round we'll be reticent to lose our mind that we're the best team in the world. I think we're very content and happy with the progression of the team. So much of the messaging has been, this isn't us at our peak, and it's almost self-messaging, I think, that they realise they need to continually evolve and get better and produce. But it's a lovely time to be able to look back on the last month and be excited about looking forward without putting, you know, trophy expectations, or you would imagine that they should be targeting a victory in New Zealand, one of the 3, not expecting to win the series, but one of the 3 I think they would be hopeful for on the back of the performances we've seen this November.
Yeah, and they're definitely good enough to do that. A couple of years ago we did a piece with Peter O'Mahony. He talked about the crippling effect of the nerves pre-match. He was fine once the game started, but he found the day before, and it was the Shelbourne part when there was grand, when you guys were out in camp, but when you got into the city centre and the match was imminent, he found that bit really hard, and he found the bit to the stadium hard. But then once the game started, obviously he judging from his performances, it was pretty amazing. This week he was talking about enjoying the whole thing, and he played like somebody who was reborn and happy to be in the role of somebody who was coming on to close games. And like, this squad is not going to be a squad where it's just the new young kids who come in and all of a sudden everything is fixed by the youth. You're going to need to get big performances from him and Ian Henderson, who is, before he comes on, the most experienced player in the field. Like, again, that's a really good sign for the coaching ticket and the environment they're creating.
You nailed it there. I think you don't want to beat up a previous regime, but I think there's a contrast to the World Cup messaging around, you know, they felt quite stunted in what they, their development. There was over scrutiny of performance, and maybe the messaging wasn't getting the most out of them. Even though the coaching had been very successful for a period of time. So it does feel as though there's an environment that they're flourishing in, that they're excited, enjoying one another's company. The coaching ticket, obviously, you look at all their personalities and they're all pretty easygoing people, even though they take their business very seriously. John Fogarty, Paulie,
Fogarty's on having a laugh as the water boy in the middle of the game.
And Andy, all of them are they're similar in many of their aspects of personality, and that seems to be having a positive impact on their players. I'm not saying that these things remain forever, but they should enjoy that now, and that comes with success as well. And success sometimes does paper over cracks, but it does feel a lot of what they're saying right now is that it feels like they've got an awful lot of input themselves, and they're playing heads up, and they're not overly subjected to a particular game plan or style. That there's a lucidity to being able to express themselves where they see fit, and they're thriving on the back of that information.
Andy Farrell specifically said that we in the Northern Hemisphere have repeatedly been told about how we're hardworking, but he believes more than that we have skills, that we are skillful people. And it's not a message. I was drawing comparisons between that and what Stephen Kenny's talking about the football team. Is like, our football culture is not just kick and rush. We can actually be creative if we invest in people and tell them that you're capable of doing this, as opposed to constantly saying, you're going to bash it up, we're going to be really strong at the set pieces, we're going to smother the opposition, don't try anything else.
I have to say, I'm looking on enviously at the moment of the style and how many people are looking for the pass. They don't throw it every time, but as offloaders.
Yeah. By not throwing it every time, you keep everybody honest.
15 years ago, there was 3 or 4 offloads in a game if you were lucky. And so it's a mindset then. You don't run the support lines of that.
Because you know it's not coming.
Because it's highly unlikely. But now if you look at every time they win a collision, they're trying to get their arms free, get through into the space, and look for someone to hopefully get through that hole. If it's not on, fine, recycle. But it's they're trying to play heads up on what's in front of them and express themselves. And I do think that is bringing the best out of them.
I think someone like James Lowe as well also typifies a little bit of the evolution in this whole thing. Bollocks is always giving out about my D was a hilarious post-match, but it's true, everybody was always giving out about his D. I'd say he was hearing that from his Leinster coaches as well, so it wasn't just the people.
He knew it too, by the way. He knew it too. He knows in his own head. You're your own worst critic, otherwise you're deluded, and you're not going to get picked for very long if you're deluded. So he knew it, and he just was trying to make light of it all and have fun, because that's in his personality. But yeah, many's a true word said in jest as well. Yeah,
it felt a little bit like he found international rugby to be that step up that everybody talks about. Oh, it's a totally different kettle of fish from the Champions Cup. The Champions Cup is totally different from the whatever league it's called. And that's true, right? And like, despite the fact he's old for a test debutant, he still is cutting his teeth. So 10, 12 caps in is a good time to make a judgment on him. I think now he's going to be a very valuable member for this team. Whether or not he's first choice if everybody's fit, he probably is at the moment. Hopefully he puts pressure on everybody else to raise their game. And it was good management to keep him in the team, as opposed to saying, right, off you go.
Yeah, it was good management, and there was definitely question marks around his selection for the Japanese game. There were does he warrant and merit that? But obviously he was showing enough, in camp to justify another opportunity. You have to remember too what he does deliver going forward. Even though he was kind of somewhat negated in his attack performances in the early test matches, because of that bigger physicality. I think now that he's had a chance to adjust, he knows that he needs to raise his attack game from Champions Cup to international. You don't get away with the same yardage in one competition to the next. And I think now that's dawned on him. But also, obviously, going away and doing all the work from a defensive point of view, and he had some big moments that absolutely builds confidence to think, okay, now I have improved. And half of it is about the self-messaging, about reminding yourself that, and building your internal confidence, not what other people think of you, but what you think of yourself.
And in retrospect, that's the benefit of the England win, is that it gave everybody this jolt of confidence to go, actually, you know what, we're on the right track here.
Totally. And you do in anything, in any turnaround, you need a catalyst of some sort, and sometimes it's a one-off moment, and sometimes it's a progressional thing. But it did feel like it was a massive leap forward in the right direction in what they were trying to do, what they were trying to achieve. But in all of this, it comes back to being collision winners again. That game plan's no good if you're on the back foot. No game plan's any good on the back foot. They might be able to create some chance, but it's way tougher because, you know, you're not thinking aggressively. You're thinking kind of reactive to a bad situation. How do we get the most out of this bad situation versus we've got them on the ropes, we've got them going backwards. So it's such a mental part to the game, but within the physical aspect, you've got to win collisions. I heard second row for New Zealand captain Sam Whitelock talking about the messaging at half-time in the French game. They were saying, we thought about being collision winners and letting the ruck take care of itself. That is the simplicity of the game. It's so much easier to win fast ruck ball when you're going forward than it is going back. And I'll say that for the next 10 years if I'm on this show. It's not going to ever change. It was the same 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So you have to first and foremost physically impose yourself, and that's why South Africa have had such huge success with a team that maybe isn't playing the most beautiful brand of rugby, but
they're not going anywhere anytime soon.
No, they're not. They've had great success over the summer too.
Is it wrong that in what we're doing at the moment, it seems like we're trying to be smarter about the collisions, that it's not just brute force, that actually we're employing more footwork, and the offload at the point of the little pop pass before the collision happens is that you set it's your strongest part against their weak shoulder, that it's not just stereotypical, we're going to bash you until we're dead.
But sure, like we've learnt in the past, trying to take people on at their own game, England, South Africa, France, New Zealand, we've come off second best. Consistently to beat those teams, we're going to have to use that physical prowess and ability we have. But
I was thinking of the France game where we beat them up.
Yeah.
But we beat them so badly that 5 of our players were left bloodied on the ground to the point where they were out for 6 months.
We got to beat them with an intelligence now and make life easier for ourselves. We don't have the same number of athletes that other teams have. Those teams that I mentioned, we just don't. Our depth goes to 30, maybe 35 of really great quality now. But beyond that, it's a significant fall off. So we want to hold on to them. So how do you modify your game a little bit just to make it that bit easier to play week on week, to play uninjured, to play for 60 or 70 minutes as a front rower, to not take on, endless amounts of ball. I remember a really good analogy is Schalk Burger. And remember his early days, that blonde hair bobbing up and down and running in and just trying to make holes for people. He had then had a long-term injury, had bad illness, and came back, and there's question marks as to whether he could do it again. And he became a playmaker. He realised, if I want to stay in this game for another 2, 3, 4 years, I've got to modify and change things. And I've got to present one picture and then become a distributor out the back as well. And that's what you're seeing in that front pod. You're seeing the same picture each time of carrying forward aggressive lines outside and inside and out with someone out the back. And until the very last second, a defence is going, I don't know which option this is, so we've got to respect them all. And then you pick the right one, it creates space and uncertainty elsewhere. And the variety of it. If you throw that every time, well, players will play off you. Whereas you see Furlong and Kelleher, they get stuck with the pass. They don't pass on rubbish as well. They carry and go, right, hard yards here. Yeah. Let's build on the next phase. It's just really smart decision making in kind of what seems like moments that aren't impactful in the game, but all those micro moments have a big overall outcome. It is the aggregation
over a season as well, and even if it's 10% fewer rucks, that means 10% less impacts, and all that kind of stuff is hopefully going to help our injury profile. To keep pumping the hype machine for a couple of minutes time, before we start looking at what else happened over November, which might slow us down a little bit. If Stephen Ferris and Jamie Heaslip were like hewn into one human being, you'd get Caelan Doris. That's what it felt like over the course of it. It was like, wow, look at this. Because he's been very hyped. We've been hearing about Doris for about 5 or 6 years. We're like, waiting to this guy. And I was like, he can't be that. He couldn't possibly live up to this. But he's living up to it. That was...
I think you're not... No, that's not a fair phrase to say. You're doing him a disservice because they were two phenomenal players. But I think genuinely the potential he has, I'm not saying he's showing it yet, but I think you can potentially incorporate Dennis Leamy's hands in there. And I think you've got the amalgamation maybe of those three players, all those together, the best version of that. I think that's what Caelan Doris could become. He's a real rugby smart. He, again, isn't afraid of getting his hands dirty, but his link play and overall intelligence is the exciting thing. And you've obviously got the athlete, and his ability to ride out that initial tackle from Matera for his try and then go again. Like, that takes a proper athlete, because Matera hits like a dump truck, and he thought, well, I've really hurt him, and he went again.
Yeah.
And it shook his feelings, there's no doubt. He was, he felt every bit of that impact, but to be able to still go again just shows what he is capable of doing. And I'm super excited about where he can go and the dynamics of that back row, where they can complement one another, where he can do ball carrying, steal ball at ruck time, clear rucks, and happy to do that. Not Richard Hill role, but a role of a bit of everything. Jack does his ball carrying and big hits, and Josh, does the groundhog, ball carrier where needs be. It just feels like there's really nice balance there at the moment. And then you've got the likes of Pete coming in to be able to play any of those positions and have big impactful moments as you want from the bench.
Yeah, drive standards and make sure that no one's getting carried away, and then they might not get in the Leinster team. Who knows when they get back to Leinster as well. Just briefly to finish on the Carbery, the match that he played, where he starts at 10, his tackle technique is excellent, he makes his kicks, he creates a bit of space, and then he finishes the game at 15, and they make sure that they're given as much game time to him as possible to show, we have your back, we trust you, this is an environment you're going to flourish in. He's obviously not at Sexton's level just yet, but it couldn't have gone much better for Carbery over the period of time, could it?
Yeah, he'd have been extremely happy with that week. I find it interesting that reading Andy Farrell that it was important that Joey had a week where he wasn't looking over his shoulder about Johnny, being there and out in the field and so on.
Yeah.
That he was able to control and run that in himself. And it does feel like you won't maybe see the true Joey Carbery until Johnny's gone, where he can impact things himself as the number one, or the perceived number one. Get rid of those shackles that I'm sure the captain of the Irish rugby team is going to have on him. That's human instinct. To the guy ahead of you is the leader of the team, one of the most important players. When I come in, I want to do a good job, but to have the freedom to do that without him watching on from the sideline, maybe he was watching on, but not actually out there training and running through things and running the opposition, must have been quite a much freer week for him. And that's what he'll need. He'll need more of those opportunities. And I thought he did very, very well, kicked extremely well, both from hand and tee, made some very efficient and maybe not impactful. Well, he had one big hit on Maroney. The rest of them, a lot of neutral tackles, which is really only all you'd expect really from your right half in most teams. And then they didn't lose their shape too often. He got the ball once or twice behind the pod where it mightn't have been needed, or he could have just played in that support role behind it. I don't know whether that was a communication issue between Murray and him. But there was no panic. And he's got the footwork to be able to get himself out of those sticky patches. That's the beauty of it. So very, very pleasing for him coming through. And we're going to need to give him more game time again, no doubt.
The fullback thing at the end, is that just okay, this game's over, let's see what happens? Are you going to take him off? No, actually stick him a fullback and see what happens. Or is that like, you know, in a tournament, over the course of a tournament where we're going to be up against potentially South Africa or France, Sexton's playing really well, he's playing really well, you want to get him in the team for half an hour or 40 minutes? Is it something that they're genuinely thinking about?
I think from a bench perspective, who the other personnel might be, I think it's relevant. So if you look at the back three from last weekend, Hugo was the really only out and out fullback. James Lowe could play there at a push. Balakoon, no, doesn't have the kicking game for it. So you're going to have someone that plays wing and fullback on the bench there, unless Joey Carbery's a 15 option, and then you can start looking to centre come winger rather than a natural full back.
Yeah.
So it does bring someone like Keith Earls, again, I know he's played full back, but you know he's a better centre and winger than he is a full back. He's played more minutes there, so it just comes down to your 23 selection, I think, rather than necessarily finding a role for him in a World Cup game.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, they're very open. We're already thinking about these things. We're on a 2-year journey here, and it's working out for us. The stuff that will make us pause a little bit, I think, is the quality of performance, in particular, that France put in against the All Blacks. One of the sliding doors moments potentially in World Rugby is New Zealand get back into the game, and there's a kick through, and it's one of those races that you never know what's going to happen. Ball could bounce either way. It bounces up for Ntamack, and 8.5 seconds later the ball is down the other end of the pitch, and you're like, oh Jesus, France are back.
Yeah, it was amazing, wasn't it? It was really amazing to watch.
The whole stadium stands up and
the calmness as well. Gosh, he's got a maturity to him, and but that also takes a big fitness as well. You've got to back yourself as well to not just automatically panic and kick the ball out and think that there was danger. That it's that switch flipped from danger to we're on.
Yeah,
they're disjointed. It's the transition piece we talk about so often. Where you're at your most vulnerable is when you turn the ball over, because you're attack minded, and how quickly can you get into defensive mindset? And some teams struggle, and depending on particularly those situations where it's almost a try scoring opportunity, so the team is littered all over the pitch, so they're all of a sudden they're defending in ones and twos. That's where they're at their most vulnerable. So if you have the wherewithal to go, right, turn that defensive situation where anywhere in the stand will do to hang on, we're off, and then the subtlety of the hands, the link play, like all of it was magic.
And I think watch it back about 3 times.
And even Woki, I thought he made the right play. He didn't butcher anything. Winger stayed off or centre stayed off. He's got to carry that. He's got to go forward, and you play the next phase rather than shipping on something where you're going to get tackled into touch, or you'll lose that next collision. He was aggressive and said, right, I'm going to pin my ears back. I mightn't get there, but then come and support me. And they were scrambling at that stage. So it would have been one of the all-time amazing, amazing tries. A real pity that it wasn't.
The fact that they tried it, though, and like you can see how that is just the type of thing that your whole culture, and DuPont being the best player in the world at the moment, the combination of what they have a fearsome pack who are full of bullies, and they have some of the silkiest backs we're ever going to see. It's breathtaking. It's a terrible shame they're on the same side of the draw as us in the World Cup. But like that would stop us getting carried away. We're not the best team in the world. They are the best team in the world, and the second best team in the world are South Africa, or maybe it's 1 and 2, and then you'd still probably put New Zealand. We'll see next summer. So we're and then England. So we're like a top 5 if we're lucky. That's okay. That's an acceptable place to be 2 years out.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Yeah, we won't get carried away because, in a quarter-final that if we find ourselves getting out of the pool, which we still have to beat Scotland and or South Africa to do that, to get into that quarter-final, you're going to come up against an ex-nemesis in New Zealand or the hosts in France that are desperate to win this World Cup. They let the one in 2007 go. They really did let it slip. It was theirs for the taking. They had a great team. So the building of their team looks great. I think their conditioning looks on a different level. And Willemse in the second row,
it's a big change, isn't it?
Oh, he's like he must have lost 4 or 5 kilos at least. Cyril Bay playing brilliantly for Toulouse and France. His offloading game as well as his work in the tight. Marchand wasn't even playing, and you have Movaka coming in at hooker and doing a brilliant job. And obviously that back row as well. You put Woki into, or Cameron Woki is it, into the second row, plays at 6, for club. But then Aldridge playing at 8, was nominated for Six Nations Player of the Year this year, and European player as well. So
they're pretty good.
These guys are good. These are really, really good players. And what they're doing is their best players are bringing the rest along with them. They've got 5 or 6 really world-class players, but also the dynamic of bringing Dante in the centre, where Vakatawa, can do that job at 13, and Fiku can be the silk in that relationship. And then the finishing power. I think they've a real find at full back too. He's, I haven't seen an awful lot of him, and he was really good during the summer against Australia, and I don't know, I think he is, someone that's the security blanket that they really need to just give them the stability elsewhere. So yeah, I'm super impressed with that performance, because as a young team, it was put to them. Yeah, they gave up their lead. Yeah. What could they find? How could they find another dimension to get themselves through? And the answer was yes.
And the other thing is that it's great to watch. The style of play that they have embraced is not to try and copy what South Africa are doing. They're not just, they're being true to themselves and true to their best selves, which is exactly what you want in world sport. It's what I think Ireland are doing under Andy Farrell, is that we're being creative and we're tapping into who we are. So
I really like, from Irish perspective, we don't see that shape. We're not seeing that shape anywhere else.
It's ours alone, you mean?
Yeah, I don't think other teams are doing that.
Is it Leinster a bit? What comes first?
Yeah, there's a bit of that in there. I think that it's a version of Leinster's, but I think the work rate of the back three has a massive impact on the creation of overlaps out wide, and I think that you can't undersell that. Hugo, Keenan, Larmour for Leinster, Conway for Ireland. Those two in the New Zealand game and the Japan game, very, very impressed. Balakoon, as good as he was when he got the ball, it felt as though he missed the opportunity of going roaming a little bit more. You saw more involvement from Conway. Didn't wait for it to come to his wing, like Lowe doesn't wait for it to come to his wing.
Is that the type of thing you feel like is like, this is my first cap properly in football?
Yeah, listen, he's 2 caps in, but I would encourage him. I would encourage him to try and go and play a bit free, because he's someone that's going to cause problems when he's on the ball.
Well, again, there was a massive buzz of anticipation in the crowd the 2 times that he got the ball in the first half in particular. It's like,
well, we saw the try that he scored against USA, and they carved them up, but it was the manner in which he finished it that still took an insane finish, irrespective of who the defence is. Yeah. Once you penetrate that line, you still have to go and when you're showing that top end speed and the ability to change footwork at speed, people are going to sit up and pay attention. So you just wanted him to have more of those touches, because he will frighten defences and his opposite number more often than not when he gets it with a little bit of space and an opportunity to put on that evasion.
It's pretty exciting.
It's really exciting. Like, you think about forgotten men like Stockdale, Yeah. All of a sudden is Stockdale playing second fiddle to James Lowe, because you don't see Stockdale and Lowe in the same team. They're quite a similar type player. The power side of the game, the left footer. So you've got the workhorse in Conway, brilliant in the air, very good finisher, packs bigger punch than he looks. Yeah. Doesn't make many mistakes. And then Balakoon has that X factor. So those guys on the right, Lowe and Stockdale on the left, and Hugo Keenan is the man in possession now, and I just don't see any displacing of him.
The only problem would be like where Sexton irreplaceable, no injury at 10 ever allowed. Murray, no injury at 9 ever allowed. Now it's like, okay, we might be able to muddle through, but if Keenan goes down, it's like, nobody's that good. We don't have any backup to him at the moment, do we? Who you can go, yeah, I trust you the way I now trust Hugo Keenan, who's been part of our lives forever.
Yeah, probably not at the moment, but that comes, he played 14 consecutive tests or something. yeah, it's all of a sudden you become very reliant on someone who, people would have been asking questions as to what he was doing there. Surely he didn't belong in international rugby yet. He's played his way in a very short period of time, got into the Leinster team, into the Irish team, and now becomes
undroppable.
Undroppable. There's other guys like Shane Daly that, if he gets his opportunity, I think can be a very, very good international player as well. Just hasn't had that chance yet to. And that'll come through some form of injury, through Hugo in the next few years, or he's playing playing the house down for Munster. If he does get to play on the wing or 15, Mike Haley, I don't see him coming. I think there's a higher ceiling in Daly than there is in Haley. It is. It's exciting that we're talking about so many different players. Not even mentioning the likes of Keith Earls, who will come in and do a great job.
I think the Keith Earls, the emotional intelligence that the Ireland camp have shown around Earls, and that he has shown as well in telling his story in his book recently, which was just made Sports Book of the Year this week as well. Like, that's the type of stuff that just shows you that things are being run well. People are allowed to be themselves, and they're allowed to express what it is that's going on in their lives, and it's a welcome environment for that. So I think we can't overstate that. I did want to ask you about the other big story that happened this week, and that was Stephen Larkham. And I really feel like Larkham is one of those kind of unfortunate sliding doors moments in Irish rugby, where he never had a full deck properly to deal with. Carbery was essentially injured for the whole time that he was there. Carbery's just getting fit. Dialende was available and unavailable because of just being away for whatever. And I'd love to see what his expression of this team would be if you had, say, Casey at 9 and Joey Carbery at 10 and Dialende at 12, and then let's see what happens there. But we're never going to see it, really.
No. And I do think that there's been huge improvements to the Munster game plan and the mindset this year. The offloading game, all of the provinces are trying to push the pass a little bit more, and that skill set that comes into national camp isn't generated in national camp. It's generated in their clubs and their provinces. So you've got to be doing that at training, and I think the catalyst of that is definitely the Leinster. I was going to say the Leinster Freudian, the Leinster setup where all the players going into international are watching them play their game and how they've developed and progressed, and then they're bringing some of those attributes back and say, this is what we need to change our game plan to compete with the best in the business at the moment, or one of the best in the business.
Because there is a view out there, and Keith Wood was talking about it this week, where he was saying that he still feels that Munster are still playing a little bit South African, that Van Graan is still being a little bit old school, and that they're still happy to do so. There's some games where it's all singing, all dancing, and then the team will change, and then the next week they'll come in and it'll be one out runners. Now, okay, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but that was kind of and that there was a yin and yang there, and Larkham was the important part of that, but was like no, and Van Graan, it's symbolic. He's going back to his spiritual home this week in South Africa, and there's still no confirmation that he's signed up for the 2-year deal that has been mooted. So
you'd imagine on the back of this news they wouldn't want to lose him also.
It'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
And you always question in those situations the chemistry between a head coach and an attack coach when they leave after a couple of years. I know it's his third season, but he came in the middle of his first one, so he didn't really have a chance to stamp his authority in that shape. So realistically, he's had 2 runs at it, and I do think there's been a big progression this season. So, he talked about family reasons, and maybe that is very, very much the case, that his family haven't settled and they want to go back to Australia. And there will be opportunities for him in Super Rugby, back there. But yeah, it is a shame that we mightn't be getting to see the best of what Stephen Larkham can contribute, because it does feel like it's an improvement again. So I'm going to say his year 2 was really year 1, and then so an improvement in year 2. What could year 3 look like? And they've got the personnel now, players to be able to play that style. Dialende, I must say, even from his World Cup performances, he's a miles better player than I thought he was. I thought he was a very good Springbok standard, physical, good defending player. He's got way more to his game than I initially had an appreciation for, and he's one of the informed players in the world at the minute. hardly ever makes an error, brilliantly defensively.
Spiky.
Oh, he got an edge. And
That's what you want.
yeah. And so I can see him fitting into that Munster setup, but there's going to be a big price tag on his head now. With this next contract, I don't know, what is he, 27 or 28? So his next 2 or 3 year contract will be big. So there'll be lots of people biting at getting his signature.
Tadhg Furlong's out of contract at the end of the year as well. His negotiation plan has worked out quite well.
Yeah, it really has.
Just as a sideline there.
Yeah, he could not be better positioned to possibly being the best paid player in Ireland.
And he deserves it.
He does deserve it. His evolution of his game. We thought we had a great player in the Lions in 2017, but he really is the envy as tight heads go of the world. There's definitely not a better tight head in the world than Tadhg Furlong. I think we can categorically say that and be happy to be quoted on that. He's
going to get well paid.
He should get well paid.
Yeah.
It's not an easy business that he's involved in.
No, and you never know when
clashing heads with guys the whole time. But when you've got other strings to your bow as well, they should and will have to probably maybe not break the bank, but they'll have to go to Johnny's level definitely to hold on to him. The only thing is he's not going to want to give up international. But I tell you what, it'll be very interesting. He goes away. Whether they select him or not.
Rule that we're calling
Do we say that there's a tight head rule?
If you're a farmer and you're a tight head, we have a special rule for you. There's no obvious Irish candidates, or are there, for the replacement for Larkham? Mike Prendergast was mentioned by Keith Wood. That would be interesting. Obviously, he's gone off and done really well for himself. Are there any others that are out there?
Yeah, because Prendy's gone. Is he in Claremont now? Or he was in Rasting. Trying to think where he'd moved this year. But he
was still at Racing, but I can check on that.
Yeah, I thought he moved. Anyway, he has obviously impressed. To be honest with you, I don't know enough of, other than watching the style of play of what Racing have done, and the guidance he's given. I bet you he'd say he's not even really a coach of them. He's a facilitator for them to show their skill set. They just play heads up. There's so many smart footballers in that Racing team, particularly Finn and Vakatawa. So when you look at their quality, is Fiku playing for Racing this year as well? I think he is.
Is it harder to work with a team that's those, like, and to try and get them to do stuff?
No? I think that's easier. I think you just go, off you go, lads. Here's a bit of shape. Here's an idea. What you think about this? Because their IQ will be as high as his. Certainly in Finn's case, and Vakatawa sees space, sees opportunity. And Fiku likewise really understands space and the speed of a pass, what it can do versus trying to run into that space. So if you look at that 3/4 line, that's pretty exciting. And
he's in with the shout with his.
He has to be. He obviously.
I mean,
he's gone off and built the international IP from another country, and he's done very well with it. So he will bring back lots of other thoughts than what he learned from as a player in Munster. He's got to be in the conversation, and nice to be able to bring your own back because they bring that passion aspect as well.
Anybody else obvious in the Irish?
Maybe Geordie Murphy. He's, I know he's out of rugby at the moment, but still keeping his eye in on what opportunities might lie there. So I think he is, from my experience, is a brilliant thinker of the game, sees and understands space very well and the creation of it. I would, even though it didn't go great for him in Leicester as a head coach, I think maybe he needs to cut his teeth a little bit more.
Well, that was a very difficult job to walk into in the middle of you're kind of already part of the system that's really struggling. And also, it was a struggling team. The personnel was a big change. The expectation was very high, but yet the personnel weren't there to be able to match that expectation. So it did feel like a real cyclical piece where he got the trough of it, and unfortunately came out the worst for it.
And now all of a sudden, you you see some personnel coming through, and Kevin Sinfield and Borthwick, and obviously their coaching has done wonders for that. But it does feel as though some of those foundations, I'm sure, were built by Geordie and his team to allow them to do that.
Yeah, okay. So there's enough there, and like maybe the other thing is they do go out and they get another Stephen Larkham style person who injects a massive skill set into it, and that's not a bad thing either.
But it just the issue is, what role do you give them? Do you get them to come in and do play attack? Is it an inherited attack game? Do they fit the same philosophies that your team that has been built in the last 3 or 4 years fit? So it's a trickier one, and that's what makes it all the more frustrating. That did feel as though that they were building something there.
Who's picking it?
Yeah. So obviously you talk about the chemistry need for Van Gran and that person to come in, for them to like each other, to have similar philosophies, and whether they're willing to bite their lip and play the Van Gran style or the style that Larkham leaves behind, and go with that, or whether they want to come in and tear that game plan up and hit them with their own one. It's a tough call. It's a tough call. You'd have to imagine it's the former, that it'll be someone who'll come in and buy into what the development of the environment has shown in the last number of months, in particular this season.
It's a big decision for them, and they've got to get it right. A reminder that Rugby and Off the Ball is with Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in. The return of the games this weekend, and then the quick fire into Europe. It's actually not a bad time of year. Do the players enjoy this time of year?
Listen, they're bouncing after that November, so I think a lot of them will be off on holidays for 3, 4, 5 days,
right,
and just to recharge the batteries. Because the funny thing, particularly with Leinster, and obviously it'll be different for the other provinces, with lesser numbers being filtered back into the team, but they've all been playing together. 12 of the starting team against the All Blacks and so on. So it's not. Also, they're comfortable now in that environment of fitting in, and they play a relatively similar style. So I don't think it'll be overly difficult. I'm not sure who their first Champions Cup game is against Wasps. Is it? Can't think. But yeah, they won't need to all play this weekend. But that's been their hallmark the last while. Is different teams, just personnel fitting in. A bit like Ireland look as though they're developing themselves. Whereas the other provinces, Deland, I'm sure won't be getting this weekend off. He'll be back in.
Straight back in.
Yeah. And
they got to get their money's worth.
Yeah, well, he hasn't played yet this season for them. It's been the world's longest rugby championship and November series.
There is a Barbarians game this weekend. It's the final game of Rob Kearney's career. A going away almost as long as yours, it has to be said.
Yeah. God, how embarrassing for him.
What do you expect from Rob Kearney in his final game?
Should I take the piss out of him and say it's not suited to his game, catching, kicking, barbarians? He deserves a crowd to go out on. It would have been, to limp out with, in a foreign country. Yeah, there were crowds in Australia, but he didn't know when his last game was going to be. To have this moment, I'm interested to see how good his skills are, having not picked up a ball. I think he did a bit of training with Leinster last week to try and hone his skills. So that's not easy. He's been working on his fitness with the Cooley Kick'ems over the course of the summer, so he would always be a fit guy. He's in good shape. But a great opportunity for his family and his friends to travel over to Twickenham and to play.
Because loads of people didn't get that when they finished during COVID.
Yeah, well, you think about Ferg and other guys that unfortunately, kind of, not that limped out, but you deserve. You put in a 10-year plus stint. You deserve the acclaim of the crowd and their appreciation for a job well done and your efforts over the course of that decade. So
Barbarian seems like good crack as well.
Oh yeah, it's proper crack. Yeah, I just texted him at the start of the week, but he was saying they were already over there and it already looked like it was a good bond. So yeah, it's about a good few beers early on the week. Try and leave it on Wednesday night. There's nothing to be had on Thursday night pints, because you still have to play 80 minutes.
You don't
and that'll take the winds out of your sails. I've got one or two of my own Barbarian stories that I'll keep for another time on that front. but yeah, it's a great time and good fun, and get to play with some of the biggest names in the world that are, you know, playing great rugby.
And an all-time great Irish career. Like there for all the big days.
All the big days, except for last weekend, 2 weekends ago. Pretty much everything. You know, even when there was question marks around his performance, he delivered and was there for Grand Slams, Championships, Heineken Cups, All Blacks. So, yeah, he can't feel as though too aggrieved about not having delivered at the very best level.
Brian, good stuff. Thanks, William.
Nice one. Cheers.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.